movement variability during practice, during skill acquisition, it might be a good thing, right? And based on this group and what you already heard, that might be a little bit preaching to the choir, but I'm still going to try to give you some background on that. Then I'm going to talk about the question of what, right? If we want variability in movement, what kind do we want, right? Is it possible to identify what's good and what's bad variability? And then the next one is, I think, for a lot of you as coaches that you'll be most interested in, is how can we create this good functional variability through the coaching instructional methods we use, okay? And then the last two things I want to talk about are looking at a little bit when things go wrong, looking at some situations where I've studied that introduce bad variability, okay, dysfunctional variability. And then finally, I want to briefly touch on something that I don't really have a good answer to, but I think it's a really important question, is if we want to do this variability, and do kind of things that Sean was doing this morning, when should we be doing that, right? Always? Or should we be kind of periodizing it like we do with physical practice? Okay, so those are what I want to touch on today. Okay, so why might a large amount of movement variability be a good thing in practice? Okay? And to start with, I want to do a bit of definitions, and this is going to really mirror a slide that Carl had, is looking at three kind of interrelated types of variability related to skill. Okay? So on the one hand, you have variability of practice. Right? That's the variability in conditions you impose as a coach. Like we saw with Sean, what side the tackler was starting on. Okay? And that dives in, there's obviously a long history of research on that. We get into issues of blocked versus random practice, all those kind of issues. The one that I want to focus on most today is the middle one, okay? The movement variability in the athlete or in the performer while they're executing the skill, okay? And with that, we can really talk about three different things. We can talk about within execution variability, okay? So when I'm executing a single movement, I'm a baseball pitcher, imagine, how much does the angle of my elbow vary during the delivery? Okay, so within a single movement. And that kind of variability, you know, one thing we could look at with that is we can get into Bernstein's kind of freezing degrees of freedom issues, right? If we're freezing degrees of freedom, we expect low within execution variability. The one that I want to focus on mostly today is the cross execution, okay? So if you look at from one pitch to the next pitch to the next pitch, does the pitcher always have the same maximum elbow angle, right? Do they always execute the movement the same way? Or is it variable? And then the last one, of course, we could look at between performers at a certain skill level. We could ask you, all elite baseball pitchers do the same thing. The answer is obviously no, but you can make some interesting comparisons. And the last one is the one that, as Carl pointed out, we tend to focus on really heavily in research for a long time, is looking at the variability in just performance outcomes, okay? Or just the end point of your movement, okay? Where is a long jumper's foot when they strike the board, okay? How variable is the pitcher's release point? How variable is where the ball goes, okay? And I think this emphasis on kind of this part of it has kind of fed backwards over the years, right? So obviously, when we're talking about variability, we want this to be low, right? When we talk about great athletes, right, one of the words they always use is consistency, right? You want consistently good performance, right? Consistency is low variability. So for performance outcomes, yeah, you want low variability, okay? But what's kind of happened is we've made this implicit assumption that we don't talk about, is that the way that you get low performance outcome variability is by having low movement variability, right? So if you want to produce the same outcome every time, you should produce the same movement every time, okay? That's this assumption that's built in, and we've been noticing for a long time. And that's also fed back to here into the variability of practice. If we want the same movement all the time, then we should have the same practice conditions all the time. Okay? So what I want to do is kind of challenge this a little bit. And if I take this a bit further, you know, this feeds into the kind of traditional view of motor learning. Okay, the motor program idea that Carl mentioned, that I always like this figure, where you learn a bunch of programs for how to move and you store them in the shelf and you pull them out as you need to move, or some ghost in your machine pulls them out. So the idea that you need low movement variability to get consistent performance outcomes is, based around the motor program idea that there's one ideal technique, okay, that you need to learn through repetition. The coach's job is to give lots of feedback and constant error correction, so to get you onto this one technique. We're typically going to use very internally bodily focused cues when we instruct the athlete, and I'm going to talk about attentional cueing later. Okay? And we have this built-in assumption I mentioned. Low outcome variability is produced by low movement variability. So movement variability is bad, okay? And we should be seeking to reduce it. Okay? As I said, that's the kind of traditional view. And when I started doing research on skill and skilled performers, I've been lucky over the years to study some really skilled performers in a lot of different domains. And I really thought I would see this too, right? I thought when I looked at the best athletes, I've studied pilots, I've studied race car drivers, all kinds of things. I always thought, the assumption I had is that when I measured their movement, it would be really, really consistent. Right? They'd move more consistently than lesser skilled athletes. But when I looked at it over the years, I found out this was not what I saw, okay? Especially when I looked at it a little more carefully and went beyond just the endpoint variability, the performance. Let me give you a couple examples. One thing I've studied a lot is pilots. Okay? This was an experiment where we had pilots having to land in a flight simulator. Okay? And had to land under, not shown here, but really poor visibility conditions. Okay? And what we found, what we did was we had pilots in flight school. We also had some military pilots and other pilots that had well over 10,000 hours of flying, so they were highly experienced. And what we found was, when we looked at how they followed the path to the runway, where they hit the runway, the endpoint variability was much lower for the experienced pilots, but how they got there was very different. In fact, the expert pilots were more variable, okay, in their path to the landing point. And what we saw when we dug into this, what was going on, is they were actually doing something that Sean mentioned in the opening. They were acting to perceive. Right? They were moving the plane around to figure out the view, right? Because it was so bad visibility, they were going higher and lower to figure out what angle they were approaching. So their variability was functional in that regard. Another example we've seen, another thing that I've studied a lot of that almost all sports scientists do is golf putting. Okay? And what I showed here is these are plots, movement plots for 4 putts. Okay, 4 different distances. This is a novice putter. This is a highly expert one. Okay, but this person was actually a professional golfer. And if we look at those patterns and we wanted to pick out what's the one that looks most consistent and low variability, you might pick this one, right? First of all, the curves really line up with each other well. The middle point here is when you hit the ball, and you can see it's very symmetrical around that point. That looks like a really nice, consistent movement pattern. The experts is much more messy, like much more variable. They're not symmetrical at all. They're kind of getting longer depending on the putt. They're getting all these different effects. So, in fact, the experts, as you look at it, are more variable. And when you dig into this one, what you see is the variability is very functional because what they're doing is varying the length of their stroke with the length of the putt, which is useful. And they're being asymmetrical. What they're actually doing is contacting the ball before the maximum acceleration occurs. And when you do that, the ball actually sticks to the putter for a while after you hit it, and you actually carry it a bit and it runs smoother. Okay, so this variability, this extremely different pattern, again, is functional. Okay, so again, that's another example. And the final one is one that I'm going to talk about in detail in a second. It's some analysis I've done on baseball batting. Okay, what happens when we train batters? And so I'll get to this in a second. So the alternative approach, right, to the traditional one I mentioned, where you want to squash variability, is the idea. There's a version of Carl's constraints diagram. The idea that there's no one ideal technique. Okay. The idea is that each individual has to find the ideal solution by solving these constraints. As a coach, we want to give less feedback and less correction to allow more self-organization and exploration. Sean, I think, made it a requirement. We have Bernstein figure in here. So here's mine. Bernstein's famous repetition without repetition. He really showed that, so this is his famous study of a blacksmith doing hammering. And he really showed not only is really low zero movement variability not to be desired, it's physically impossible, right? You cannot produce the same movement over and over again, even for a relatively simple task like hammering. A couple things, both Sean and Carl mentioned, variability, allowing you to move more variably, it allows for redundancy and degeneracy. It allows for more solutions. So the alternative view is movement variability is good, okay? So that's kind of the, obviously the message I want to give and talk about today. So to kind of summarize the why question, why is movement variability, can it be good in skill acquisition? Allowing an athlete to be more variable in their movement instead of forcing them into one ideal movement allows for adaptation to individual constraints, right? We're going to talk about that in a second. Their own physical capabilities, their height, their weight, their flexibility, and so on. It allows for adaptation to task and environmental constraints, okay? This is one of my favorite examples here. Imagine after today's session, we decide to go to a bar, and you decide to buy us a round of drinks, and you're carrying it back, the tray of glasses back to the table. Keeping that tray in balance is an example of a task that has multiple solutions, right? There's multiple different ways you can hold your hands, your arms, your shoulders to keep that tray level. And what it does, that gives you not only that flexibility of solutions, allows you to adapt to multiple constraints. You get in a tight area where you can hardly walk through, you lift the tray up on one hand. You come up to a push door, right? You can use your elbow to open the door, right? So this redundancy of the solutions allows you to adapt to the constraints, okay? Variability, obviously, if we're going to seek for exploration, we're probably going to expect variability. Exploration and variability are going to go hand in hand. And the last one I mentioned with the pilots, more movement can give more perceptual information. It's kind of the other side of the coupling we don't talk about, okay? So that's a lot of reasons why movement variability might be a good thing. Now I want to get on to the question of what type of variability do we want, okay? And I'm going to use the term here, good and bad variability. That's kind of a loaded, obviously good is suggesting it's good. I think there's other ways we can talk about it, task relevant versus task irrelevant. There's some other terms that might be better, but I'll use good and bad for now, okay? So, if we're going to allow our athletes to explore and move in whatever way we want, can we figure out what is good and bad? Okay? And what I want to do is show you an analysis that I've done to try to tease this apart, using someone else's technique, but with some of my data. Okay? So what I'm going to talk about, almost all of the stuff I'm going to talk about today, is data collected in various experiments using baseball batting and virtual reality. Which I've done for many, many years. It's gone through various forms, from a large projection screen with a motion track bat that has tactile feedback. Now we're moving towards, this isn't actually mine, this is the one they have in Amsterdam right now, but ours is coming together very similarly, where you have a head-up display, Oculus, and you have the person's swing. Okay? And so I've done a large variety of studies in this, and so I'm going to show you some of them with very skilled players, novice players, some training studies, so I'm going to show you a lot of data from that. And what I want to show you first is a look at what happens to movement variability in batting with training. Okay? And what I'm going to do is something that Sean, I think, mentioned. I'm going to do what's called an uncontrolled manifold analysis. Okay? Which sounds really, that's an awesome term, but it sounds a bit like something to do with cars, but it's a really interesting approach. So what I did with this was data from a training study that I published last year. And what I did was to look at the timing of a baseball swing. Okay? And from myself and a lot of other people, we can divide a baseball swing into distinct biomechanical phases. Okay? You can see over there the GIF of Josh Johnson. The main phases are the windup, which is this timing mechanism that hitters use where they lift their foot off, front foot off, and put it back down. You see it there. Then you have a pre-swing where you load your body, moving away from the ball really, and then you have the swing where you actually you get the bat to the ball. What I want to do for today, I've actually done it with these three variables, but I want to look at, let's just talk about the wind-up and the swing. Okay, I'm going to lump all this together in the swing. The timing from your foot off to your foot down, and the start of the bat movement to where the point of contact with the ball. Okay? If we look at the timing of these, okay, they roughly occur, okay, the wind-up roughly occurs about 0.6 seconds before the ball arrives, okay, on average. And what we can do is take all the swings and kind of scale it to that. And so what we get when we look at it that way is there's this temporal constraint imposed on the action. If you're going to, in this case it's 0.58 seconds, if you're going to start your wind-up 0.58 seconds before the ball arrives, then the length of the wind-up plus the length of the swing has to equal that value, okay, or very close to it. The timing margins in baseball are incredibly small. Right? So if you're a little bit too long or a little bit too short, you're not going to get